There was a time in Gold Coast history where the British were paying rent for their own castles and forts that they owned to the Asantes. How this came about is something that could have been ripped from any of those war adventure films that we spend hours watching. 18th century Gold Coast, you can see the influence of the British with their forts and castles spread all through the coastal areas. Now, while the British are occupying the coastal lands, the Asantes are steadily spreading their influence throughout the Gold Coast and some parts of Togo. Even though Asante Man has had several successes with their war campaigns, there's one more thing on the agenda that they want desperately. It's an opportunity to directly influence the coast where the British are stationed. But up until this moment, they've had no reason to march onto the coast. But all this is about to change. Two chiefs from Western Asin were accused of stealing gold from the grave of a late chief of Eastern Asin. The Asante ruled that these chiefs were to pay compensation for their crimes. These chiefs were like, you can't do me foco. But you see, in this life, before you tell somebody they can't do you foco, you should make sure that in fact they cannot do you foco before you make that claim. The Asante, not one to ignore a challenge, said, checkmate. He gathered his army and they marched on to Western Asin. It was at this point that the chiefs decided to play hit and run and they escaped into the lands of the Fantes. So Osei Kwame Tutu, the Asante at that time, asked the Fantes to hand over these two chiefs to him. The Fantes refused to comply. So now Asante Man had to declare war on the Fantes. Storytelling has always been a major part of our culture. In fact, it's one of the ways that history was preserved. In the past, children would gather around the fire and adults would tell them stories about our history in ways that motivated them to champion the cause of their states, countries, etc. And in keeping up with that tradition, I would want to recommend this book to you, The Usurper's Dream, which fictionalizes the story of the Asante Empire's history. You can get copies on Amazon, or you can call the number in my bio and a copy of the book will be delivered to you. Santiman wages war against the Fantes, and despite the Fantes getting support from the British, Santiman claims a decisive victory in this battle. So the Fantes have lost the battle. So they rush to the British fort at Anomabo with the two chiefs. The commander from the fort begins to shoot from his cannons. Each shot takes a large percentage of the Asante army, but this does not stop them from advancing on the fort and the surrounding village. By nightfall, only 8 British soldiers remained defending the fort, and over 8,000 locals who could not get into the fort had been killed. Two chiefs who had been the cause of this war were handed over to the Asantes, and then the British agreed to hand over their title deed to their castles and forts in the coastal areas to the Asantes. The governor, however, managed to convince the Asante to allow them to still have their judicial authority over the coastal area.